Yeah, all right. So, welcome back. And today is sort of the culmination of this first part of the course that I've been talking about on science and religion. We did our best to kind of look at definitions of science. Some really emphasize the empirical approach and even go so far as positivism, where you can't really know something with, capital K-N-O-W, unless it's experimental. But that ran into problems because that phrase isn't experimental. That's a philosophical statement. Science also could be defined as broadly as the theory of a matter, like Mortimer Adler thinks in his book, How to Read a Book. And so this is kind of the culmination where we come up and we're comparing scientific views and religious views on these main areas of life of origins, meaning, morality, and destiny. And it kind of helps to take a systematic approach to look at all of the different worldviews side by side. And so I kind of ask, and where do your views line up? So you can look at this table at the end, and I'll make a PDF of it available online so you can print a copy and you can kind of look. Because this is an analysis of really 6 internally consistent worldviews. Many times our views, our personal views, are not internally consistent. Like, what do I mean by that? Well, we may have a certain view scientifically, and that doesn't line up with the same kind of view moralistically. Or we might have a view of the afterlife that doesn't line up with our scientific views. And so there may be conflicts within our own views. And so we need to analyze ourselves to see if that creates cognitive dissonance or if we're okay with that. And so we need to look to see, and many people try to strive to have a consistent worldview. So let's look at some of these today. When we're dealing with worldviews, that was that Freud used that word, Weltanschauung, that view of the world. It's kind of the lens. Remember, I had the picture of the lady looking through a pane of glass with a frame around it. Like, that was her worldview, and she looked at everything through that pane of glass. And it sort of characterized how she saw life and everything about life. This would be when she looks at how things began, she would be looking through her worldview at that question. And when she looked at, is there a right and wrong, or what's the purpose of my life, she would be looking through that view at that question. And so all of her answers would either fit in that worldview, or if they didn't fit, and she couldn't see them, and someone made her aware of those other kinds of arguments, it might create some tension within her view. And so you might feel some tension today as we compare the lefts and rights and tops and bottoms of this table. And that's okay. It's totally expected for you to say, I kind of fit over on the left on this table in this row, but on the right on this table in that row. And it just is one of those things that hopefully afterwards you will chew on for a little bit. Okay? It's not meant to push you into a column. It's meant to show you at least 6 different columns on these different topics. And so we started out talking about these major categories: origins, meaning, morality, and destiny. And just recently, at the end of the 95 years since the Scopes lecture, we ended with a discussion on the age of the earth and those kinds of things. And all of these worldviews have to answer these 4 main categories. And so dealing with that age of the earth issue that we ended with last time, there's really just 2 views, plus or minus a few years. There's some modifications to either of these. Science may come up with another decimal place of precision, but essentially there's the old and the young. Okay? And whether someone believes that 6,000 or 10,000 is really not that significant when it's compared to 4.5 billion. Okay? And so it's easy to look at that and say, okay, on the age of the earth, you've got 2 views. Old and young. Okay, and so you might fall on one or one side or the other on that issue. And so you can look at that and say, okay, I'm on this side or that side. Well, then there's also the age of the universe. Okay, the latest astronomy and cosmology research tells us it's about 13.8 billion years. But remember that when we looked at inside the head or the thinking of someone who believes in the young earth view, their view was governed by the Word of God and the Bible, and looking to see that if there was no death before the fall of Adam and the genealogies were comprehensive, then it adds up to about 6,000 years, plus or minus maybe 1,000 or so. Okay, so again, you've got two views on that, so it's very easy to draw a vertical line on that. Some of these views will be gray in between, and we won't know exactly where to draw the vertical line, but they'll have two poles. Okay, but this one is pretty easy to draw a vertical line between old and young. Some of the other origins questions are physics. So let's think about physics for a second. We use physics every day. We drop objects, gravity takes over, we've got the mathematics associated with that. We can look back in time by looking out at the stars. So light is going at a constant velocity, a defined velocity, and we are looking back at the past. When we see the sun, we're actually seeing the sun 8 minutes ago, because it took 8 minutes for that light to get to us. And so if we look at a star even further away, it might be 40 light years away. So it took 40 years for that light to get to us. So when we look at that sun, we're actually seeing the past. We're seeing that star 40 years ago, or 100 million years ago, or 1 billion years ago. The farthest, most distant objects we see in astronomy are calculated to be 13.8 billion light years away. Okay. Now that only fits if we believe that physics was uniform in the past. If physics changed in the past, it would be like looking through water. So you would be looking through water and you would be seeing accurately shaped images, but they would be distorted in some way. And so there's a dividing line between someone who believes physics was the same in the past versus physics was not the same in the past. And that's how you get this dividing line between the years and the ages of the earth. So someone who believes in a young earth would be looking at physics and saying, we can't know that physics didn't change in the past. And so that would be an argument that you would have with a person like that. Would say, what evidence do you have that physics did change in the past? What evidence do you have that it didn't change in the past? And so that would be a question worth exploring. Okay. And looking at, because if we look at physics and we have the view that it didn't change in the past, then we really can't justify the young earth view from science, from a scientific perspective. Because we have to say physics had to have changed in the past, otherwise everything we see would tell us that the universe is old and vast. Okay? So again, those dividing lines kind of line up with each other, because that's what you have to do with physics if you're going to look at the universe and say that it's young. Okay? We'll get to some other dividing lines here pretty soon. Now, the standard model for the beginning of the universe, it was originally called, jokingly, the Big Bang. Okay, if you run time backwards, we saw that the universe is expanding. If you run it backwards, it's compressing. Okay, it's shrinking, and it shrinks back to a point. And if you have had any physics in high school and so on, a lot of these forces are calculated between two objects. Let's take charge. So you take two positively charged objects, particles, and the force between them is related to 1 over the distance between them. Okay, and that distance is in the denominator. What's going to happen if that distance shrinks to 0? You're dividing by 0. When you divide by 0, they call that a singularity. And so they said that the whole universe shrinks back, and they call it that singularity. That's basically space going back to 0. And all the evidence shows that this model fits the data best. Okay. Part of that data is this thing called the initial expansion of the universe. Okay. So there's this event where the universe is expanded out to a large percentage of its current size, and then it's expanding further. But this initial expansion is incredibly rapid. The thing that's strange about this initial expansion is it's faster than anything we could imagine. So it's faster than the speed of light. It's faster than anything. It kind of breaks physics. There's new physics involved in this initial expansion. And so that's where they start positing multiverses, other universes, other physics. And so really every model, if you look up here, has some sort of other universe associated with it. You can have the models over on the left where it says that this initial expansion is evidence of a multiverse. And because our universe looks fine-tuned, they say statistically ours looks fine-tuned because we're here to observe it. That there must be nearly an infinite number of other multiverses out there, and we're just statistically the lucky one. We're the one that has life in it. We're the ones that has observers in it. We're the one universe that is fine-tuned for our existence. But there must be all these others, because that wouldn't make sense that the only universe would be the perfect universe. Okay? And so they posit this multiverse to kind of get out of this statistical improbability of ours being so unique, because our universe is incredibly unique. If you think about spreading out all of the matter in the universe, if you spread it out too fast, then gravity is too weak, and it'll spread out, and you won't have planets, you won't have galaxies, you won't have stars, you won't have life. Okay? If you spread it out too slowly, gravity then is too strong, and it'll collapse back on itself, and it'll just crush back in, and you won't have light, you won't have stars, you won't have all of these things that are required for life. And so this is called the fine-tuning problem of the universe, that it was expanded at just the right speed, and coupled with gravity, it was set up just so that galaxies would form, and then solar systems that would support planets that had life possibilities in it. And so if you're over on the left side of this, and you'll see what the columns are as we move down, I purposely put the labels at the bottom so that you don't mentally put yourself into a column until the end. So we're looking at the views, and then we'll get to the labels at the bottom. So over on the left would be a view that just thinks we're the statistical lottery universe, that we got the one ticket that's perfect. Okay. Over on the right, obviously, this would be one of the religious views. This is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. But then again, this is speaking about God, who's other than our universe. In whatever realm that God's in, that's also another universe. So even the Christian view has a multiverse, if you will. At least two. The physical universe, and then the spiritual universe that contains that. We don't know much about that spiritual universe, but again, with both views, far on the left and far on the right here in our table, they all have something outside of this universe posited, which I thought was interesting as I was looking at these ideas. Okay. In the middle is gray. There's really not very many vertical lines here. It's just two poles. Either the far left is just straight statistics for us to get this lucky, and over on the right you have a deity. The Christian view would be God in Genesis, but other religions would say, God or whatever God is created this universe in a fine-tuned manner. And you can stop me for questions on any of these or comments. So the next row, we talked about evolution a lot in our science, and I realize it's kind of hard maybe for y'all in the back to see. So over on the left, it says natural selection on random variation. So basically the Darwinian model, but not the full Darwinian model. This is just that microevolution piece. So you have some natural selection operating on random variation within a genome, within a pool, a gene pool. And in all of views, this is another thing that I found was interesting, that religious or non-religious, all of those groups affirm this definition of evolution. This is the one that makes you take your antibiotics all the way through. Okay, this is bacteria mutating, making strong and weak bacteria. You take enough antibiotics, you kill them all, and then you don't make superbugs. Okay, and even the young earth Christians will take their full antibiotics because they know that microevolution is demonstrable in your very stomach. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. Now what the real question is there a limit on novelty? So part of my goal here is to just give you some terms. It's probably not helpful to speak for or against evolution. What is helpful is to talk about novelty. Is there a limit on novelty in your view? It's a rhetorical question. You can think about it. Over on the left, and here we have kind of two poles and then a mushy middle. Okay? On the left, they say absolutely not. There's no limit on novelty. Now what do I mean? That means that the DNA can mutate and create children that have a range of abilities, a range of properties, novel properties. and that their children and their children and their children. So this genetic drift can go and go and go. And then you can get creatures with dramatically different features at this end versus that end. If there's no limit on novelty, you can start with a bacterium and you can end up with horses and cats and fleas and mosquitoes and you and me. There's no limits on what this random variation and natural selection can do. So that's what I mean by limits on novelty. So on the left, someone with that view would say no, there's no limit on novelty at all. Over on the right, we would say yes, there is a limit on novelty, that you get a wide range of genetic variability, but it's not so wide that you have now 4-legged humans, or 6-legged chihuahuas, or, mosquitoes that, whatever, shoot lasers out of their eyes. I mean, there's limits on novelty, that you get a good range of genetic variability, but it doesn't go to the point of brand new body plans where you would have, humans with photosynthetic skin or something like that. And in the middle, it's kind of like, I say yes-ish, meaning there might be some limits on novelty, but there's a way around that, okay? And so that we'll talk about this middle view in a second. It's an interesting view. So pretty simple. Limits on novelty, no, yes, and maybe in the middle, okay? Now this one, now we're starting to get more dividing lines. There's more of a variety on this question. And this is a new term for you perhaps. It's the word agent. Agents in biological change. So is there an agent needed? So on the right, that's simplest to understand. On the right, yes, an agent was useful in biological change. In fact, if you read Genesis, it says God intervened multiple times to create plants, and then the plants grew for a while, and there was some genetic variability, but there was a limit on that genetic variability, and God had to intervene again to make animals. And there was many different kinds of animals, and they developed for a while and so on. And then there was another need for intervention because there was a limit on the variability. And even though humans look like animals, in this view, humans are not animals. They have animal-like properties, but it's the mental capacity that's different. And so this one would be God intervened to make humans special in some way. Okay? And so that would be the far right over here. God intervened multiple times because there's a limit on novelty that comes from microevolution. So see how those three views go together. Over on the left, absolutely no limit on microevolution. You just give it time. 3.8 billion years is a long time. And you don't need any agents. In fact, there is no agency. We're really just atoms doing what atoms do. Bonding, making and breaking bonds, DNA changing, natural selection operating on that genetic drift and creating new species through geographic isolation. And then in the middle we have several different views here. Let's look at the middle view here. That says God gifted creation. So that one is the one that kind of tries to blend both sides. It says over on the left that when I say yes-ish, I mean that evolution seems to be, in this view, an accurate portrayal of the geologic record and the biodiversity through time, but yet it's almost too perfect, and that God had a hand in it. And so this is called God-gifted creation. This middle view does not like the interventionists on the right. So they're saying they don't like to see God getting involved. They like God sort of shook up the box of the universe and let it go, and the dominoes fell exactly perfectly. And they see that as a bigger view of God because God was so perfect. You ever play Yahtzee? It's hard to get those 5 dice. Like you've got 5 dice in a cup and you roll it and you get all 5 the same number. Or it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're saying God is really good at Yahtzee. God can shake up the universe and let it go, and you get evolution, and it goes from bacteria to us without any intervention. So that would be this middle view. Now, a little further to the right, that says an unknown intelligence. these people in this view are not committed as an organization or as a camp to the biblical record. But they do say there's a limit on novelty. So what do you do when you're not, say, a Christian and committed to Genesis, but you just can't see that evolution explains these discontinuities? You've got plants and no animals, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got animals. And they look at that and they say that can't, there's not enough time for that abrupt change. That's a discontinuity we see in nature. And so they say there was some unknown intelligence that did that. And that word intelligence kind of gives it away as to what that view is. And we'll see the label later on. But they're saying these discontinuities can't be explained by random mutation and the slow mutation rates that we typically see in evolution. And then this view that I've saved for last is between the no agency and the God-gifted creation is called panpsychism. I'd be surprised if anybody's heard of that one. Is anybody? Panpsychism. This is a unique view, and I put it in here because it was so interesting to me. It's the only person I've heard really make a case for it was Thomas Nagel in his book Mind and Cosmos. And we'll see why he made that case in a second. But panpsychism says, well, think of the word pan, everything, right, all, and psych, mind, okay? And so he's saying that inside of matter is some sort of mental property. So your pencil has mental properties in it, but they don't emerge because it's not in the right form. So when the atoms are in the right molecules and in the right form, like neurons in our brain with blood flow and oxygen and so on, the mind emerges naturally. And so those mental properties are in nature. That's panpsychism. Okay. So very, very interesting view because it does not have essentially a God associated with it. Nature's the God. But yet sort of the mind is really not a God. The mind of nature is in nature. But he's saying there must be mental properties to nature because we see mental properties in us. And we see them in chimps and cats and dogs. I mean, you see animals acting with minds. They're not as advanced as ours, but that's part of his view. And that lines up on that agents of biological change. So what would be the agent in panpsychism? Nature itself. So nature itself is trying to emerge these mental properties. And so there's sort of a directed evolution by nature itself. Very, very interesting view. Okay. Now we get out of sort of the science and origins, and we look at some of these other topics that are really important. In fact, it was the meaning and the morality rows that really pushed Thomas Nagel out of materialism and into panpsychism, because he says that there is no meaning in nature. Atoms are just atoms. You know, my solvents sit on the shelf and I ignore them and they don't get upset. Okay? And then when I need them, I use them, and when they're done, I throw them away with our waste procedures, of course. But the point is, there's no meaning to that solvent until I give it meaning. And really, if I'm just part of nature, what meaning is there in my life? It's defined by me, and it's illusory, really, because it's my own quest for meaning, and I may change that tomorrow. So on a materialist view, there really is no meaning to life. You have to develop your own meaning. How many people saw the movie or read the book A Fault in Our Stars? That was in that book. When he says, who told you life ever had to have meaning? You do what everybody else did, and you make up your own meaning. And so they were struggling with cancer, terminal cancer, and they pretty much had to arrive at life is okay. But they were having to come up with that. They had to come up with their own meaning. Over on the right, if you have a biblical worldview, if you're a Christian, then your meaning is discovered in relation to your Creator. If you're another religion, there may be some meaning associated with your deity or your religion. So in relationship to your religion or relationship to your creator, those would be transcendent sources of meaning, something that transcends humanity and either is eternal or is somehow greater than humanity. So this meaning scale, I don't have vertical lines on these different views because people in those different views will have different approaches to meaning. But you get over here on the right towards, say, something that's written down like in the Bible or whatever, then you're going to have more concrete dividing lines between what people believe gives them meaning. Okay? Any questions on that one? That row, even though we talk the most about origins, it seems, at least at the university, the meaning row, when I've heard speakers talk about their most popular talks or downloaded content and so on, whenever they address meaning, that's the topic that people really want to talk about. Does it really matter? You're all here for a degree, various degrees in the room. Why? What's it going to matter? A lot of times it's to have a better life, to have a decent wage, to maybe have an impact on people's health or mental abilities or their education. But even then, at the end of your life, it's going to go away. Okay? Maybe it'll be in your kids, your grandkids, or your friends. You'll have impacted them, and their memories of you will sort of carry you on past your death, but they're going to die too. And everything you've done and every person you've ever contacted is eventually going to be gone, and your tombstone will be there, and eventually it's going to be gone. Rain and wind and freezing cold. And I mean, yeah, it's serious. It's, when you think about this, and some people think about it more than others, and, they show up in my office and they're like, why am I here? And I'm like, I don't know, but let's talk about it. These are some things that people struggle with. And that's one of the rows on these worldviews, is to think about what really matters. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Okay. Then we get into morality. And I like to think not of morality as sort of moral opinions, right? What's right and wrong. But when we really get interested in morality, when we think we have moral duties, it's wrong. You should have helped that person. That's a duty, right? Or you wronged me. You shouldn't have done that. You had a duty not to do that. And so a duty is something you owe someone else. And this is where it comes in, that there's a lot of dividing lines here. Over on the far left, in a materialist worldview, the duties are socially constructed. And you've heard social contract theory of ethics, perhaps, where society decides, and we even teach kind of tighten my jaw a little bit, but in kindergarten, the kids, all right, let's come up with the class rules. The class sets the rules, and that's social contract theory. It's great. Then, nobody's the bad guy because the class as a whole decided these are our rules. And that works to some degree, okay? But eventually you have to say, well, who's to say? What if the group decides to pick on somebody? That's not cool, but it's the group. That's a society that's choosing those rules. And so this can have some problems. Then you have over here on the far right, and this idea between objective and subjective. So socially constructed, my little example would be subjective. So it's based in the subject. In this case, a particular society would decide on a particular set of rules. And in that case, society is the subject because that society might have different rules than this society. And so the rules are different based upon the different subjects. It's not mind independent. An objective morality would be the same for everybody, no matter what time they lived in, what society they were in, whether they even knew it or not. So objective is subject independent or mind independent. And so these would be duties that you owe whoever has the authority to make you owe them. These are duties you owe to that person or being. And so you naturally would see over on the religious side of things that objective and divine would be a view of morality. That God has set the rules and you owe your moral duties to God. And when you sin and hurt somebody, you're actually hurting God's creation and going against God. That's the greater moral transgression. Not just breaking society's rules. You see the difference? So subjective would be society to society, they change no matter where you are. Objective would be something above society that sets it for everybody. Now, whether you can know those, that's a whole different question. Okay, this is just saying, does morality exist that way or not? The whether you know the right or wrong is what they call epistemology, how you know the rules. That's a different question than whether the rules exist. So this moral question is, do the rules exist? Is there such thing as objective moral duties? And on the left would say no, but they're socially constructed, so we do the best we can. On the right, we would say yes, they're objective moral duties and they're given by God. They might be revealed in the Bible or some other kind of religious writing. And in the middle, we have various views. So in the middle, under this God-gifted creation, we have objective and divine in the Bible. So that's the group that kind of wants to have the Darwinian evolution, but also have the divine revelation. So they want both. They want the Darwinian evolution and the divine revelation. And that's why they say that this God-gifted creation by the divinity, but it looks scientifically like a random, undirected process from our perspective. And then under panpsychism, this is the thing that drove Thomas Nagel out of the materialist camp. He said, values and morals are objective. There really is a right and wrong, but you don't get that from materialism. Let me say that again. Materialism does not get you objective moral right and wrong. So where does it come from? And he said it has to come from nature because he's non-religious. So he said, I can't go to religion and I can't go to materialism, so there must be something mental in nature that would give you values, that would give you a mind, that would give you this objective moral duty. And so that's where he ended up in the camp of panpsychism. Now we get to destiny, looking ahead. So the universe, what's going to happen to the universe? Scientifically, looking at the increasing entropy of the universe, the expansion of the universe, the stars exploding and shrinking and reforming and exploding. We're on our third generation of stars. We'll keep going through generations of stars as they get heavier and heavier elements. They get more and more dense. They collapse. They supernova. They blow out a lot of debris. Those turn into planets. And then there's enough density to start another star, and you have another solar system. And this happens again and again, but you're blowing material off all of the time. And that material goes off into space, and eventually it all spreads out, and everything's too cold to start another star, and you have thermodynamic heat death. Basically, it's like the battery running out. Now, when I would hear this stuff as a kid, I would feel terrible. I'd be like, oh man, that's, our sun's going to burn out. Well, it's going to be billions of years from now. Like I said, I don't have to worry about it, but that's what it looks like. And then over on the religious side of things, you're going to have various eschatologies. In the Bible, you'll have heaven and hell and a new creation. So this talks about an abrupt end to the universe, not a slow end like a thermodynamic heat death. Okay. Other religions would have different views of that. And that's why there's really no dividing lines there, because individuals in each of these camps would have their own eschatology based upon the things that they read. If you read the Bible, it's in Revelation and Matthew and Thessalonians, you will see different passages that talk about the end times, if you will, and what's going to happen to the universe and what's going to happen here on earth. But as far as just taking the line that we have in science from all of the data that we've collected and extrapolating that out, that's what we have on the left side, thermodynamic heat death, where things just spread out and that's the end. And individually, what do we have? Well, we, from dust to dust. That's what I kind of described. Us dying, our friends dying, our tombstones decaying and becoming soil, and eventually getting blasted away by our own sun and atoms in the universe. And so that's, again, you could look at that and it kind of gives you a strange feeling. Or over here on the religious side of things, there's something in many of these views, like panpsychism, God-gifted creation, the biblical views and other spiritual views, that you have something in your body that's not material, that we call the soul. And that is everlasting, that continues on. Now, the psychologists would say that's wishful thinking, that we have this thing plugged into us that seeks for eternity. We don't like the idea of our tombstone even being the thing that goes away. I mean, we kind of reject that, and we hate that. What is it about us that hates that? And so this thing in us, our mind, our personal selves, as we think about eternity, we can't sort of see eternity without ourselves in it. So the psychologists would say that it's just a way to project our mental thinking into the future. And so we've come up with this word for the soul. Religious views, though, they describe it as sort of the seat of the will. That many say that you're not a body that possesses a soul. You're a soul that's housed in a body. And that when your body dies, your soul leaves. And of course, in the biblical view, it is either with or without God. Now, there's descriptions of those, heaven and hell and so on, but the main point is with or without God and that relationship with God. So that would be the thing that would be the destiny for a religious person. And then other religions would have, like the reincarnation we talked about with Buddhism or Hinduism, a different eschatology, but again, not a materialist eschatology. If your body dies and you're reincarnated, again, it's not your same atoms. You're in a different body. So something has gone from body A to body B. And so that would be your soul. And so, again, various views on that, no real clean places to put the vertical lines. But we've covered these: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, a bunch of different views. So let's see what the labels are for these different views. And so far on the left, I've talked about strict materialism, and that would be matter is all there is. Okay. Coming this way, panpsychism. Then in the middle, theistic evolution. Maybe you've heard of that. It's sort of evolution, and again, adding in divine revelation to that. This fourth column coming down would be intelligent design. And then the fifth, old earth creation, and the sixth, young earth creation. And so you can kind of see these internally consistent views for each one of these. And these are representatives, not necessarily official representatives, but people you may have heard of that are in these different views. So you've heard of Richard Dawkins and the sort of the new atheists, Sam Harris and Lawrence Krauss and Daniel Dennett. They would be in the strict materialism camp. Moving over, Thomas Nagel and what they call Platonic realists would be in that panpsychism camp. A theistic evolution would be Francis Collins, the former NIH director. Outspoken and a brilliant speaker, Stephen Meyer for the Discovery Institute, is in the intelligent design camp. Hugh Ross would be a representative for old earth creation and his reasons to believe ministry. And then Ken Ham here would be a spokesperson for the young earth view that you could find. So you can take this, again, I'll put this up as a PDF, and you can Google these persons, see quotes, and read their books on their different views. So websites that you can go to, over on the left, you have the Skeptical Inquirer as sort of CSICOP.org. And again, that's going to be, it's more of a periodical, like a magazine, that has articles on different topics in science. And so that would be from a materialist mindset. The book Mind and Cosmos was my source for the panpsychism view. It's an interesting view. Then the theistic evolution, there's a website. This isn't the only organization that's related to theistic evolution, but it's one of the more well-known ones, called BioLogos. And they're taking the two terms. Logos is the name in John chapter 1 given to Jesus, and bio obviously is bio, so they've combined it, BioLogos. So again, the biology and the biblical beliefs that they want to marry together, and that's their website, BioLogos. Over here, then, discovery.org is the Discovery Institute, which is the main institute that's proposing intelligent design. Reasons.org would be the one for old earth creation, and answersingenesis.org youngearth.org would be the one for young earth creation. So you can find information on all these different views, and that's why I held the labels and the people and the websites to the end, because I wanted you to think about your views coming down these different columns. And so if you're in that far left column, you might look up there and say, well, yeah, I definitely believe in an old earth and so on, but I'm not so sure about God's existence or the existence of the soul. And so you would be in multiple columns, and that would be something that you would chew on. You would think, which column, does my view fit neatly into one of these columns, or is it all over the place? And so it should be something that you think about and say, well, my views may be consistent with the science, but when I get into the other topics like meaning, morality, and destiny, I'm somewhere else. And actually the science goes quite a ways across this screen. This one here, who knows? Maybe you're drawn to the idea that nature has mental properties built into it. We used to think that. That's part of why organic chemistry was a special field, because we thought it was the molecules of life. So carbon-based life, our lives based on carbon atoms, that they thought that was something interesting and unique. Okay, and that there was something special about those molecules. And even today, what do we talk about? We really have this big premium on all natural. Most of the time they're trying to say we're staying away from synthetic pesticides, but it's the same molecules. Okay, whether ammonium comes from some sort of inorganic synthesis process or it comes from some natural process, it's the same actual molecule. Theistic evolution, perhaps you're in this middle column where you say, yeah, I'm very convinced by all of the evolutionary reasoning that I've read, but yet I fall into these areas where I believe in the soul and I believe that values are objective and divine, and so I'm going to have trouble being a strict materialist from a moral standpoint or from a meaning standpoint. Intelligent design is one that's maligned quite a bit, because very seldom do people give them credit for this box right here. Let me circle it with the mouse so you can see on the video. This box right here, they do not take an official stance on the agent of biological change. They leave it as an open question. So they do science up to the point, and they say there's a discontinuity here. We've got plant life and sponges, and you have the Cambrian explosion, and now you have most of the major phyla in the whole fossil record happening within 50 million years. There's no existing mutation rate that could explain that. And so they believe an agent has acted in that spot. But they have people who are deists and say it's an agent, but it's unspecified and doesn't really interact with its creation, and then they've got Christians. And so many times people will pick on their Christian members and say, see, it's just Christians in that organization, but it's not just Christians. I've talked to many of them and have seen lots of interviews, and so they just leave that as an open question. They do the science right up to the point where there's evidence of an intervention, but they don't go past it because, again, you can't put that agent in a test tube. So you don't know the identity of the agent that made that discontinuity, but you can say this continuity doesn't fit with any law of science that we have. It was too rapid and too abrupt to fit into our gradual Darwinian model. So that's the intelligent design view specifically about that agent of biological change. And then over here, this is the old earth creation column. It says there's limits on novelty. It takes the Bible at its word in terms of God intervening, but it also takes science at its word in terms of the ancient universe and the ancient earth, and is trying to see how those things might merge together. This is the group that uses the two books approach, the book of nature and the book of scripture, and saying when those things are in conflict, we've misinterpreted one or the other or both. And so they're looking at other alternate interpretations of maybe nature, maybe we are fooled, maybe physics is wrong in that and we've got a wrong number, or maybe the interpretation of 6 days is not 6 literal 24-hour days but long periods of time. And then the young earth view, we've talked about being tied to the genealogies and being tied to the theological claim that there was no death before the fall. So, who fights with whom and what do they fight over? Right? We know that there's conflict. And so this is a nice sort of analysis. There's a lot of antagonism on this table. And so over on the left, when Thomas Nagel wrote his book, his little subtitle was Mind and Cosmos, How the Neo-Darwinian Synthesis is Almost Certainly Wrong. Okay? And so the materialists called him a heretic. And that's kind of funny because that's the language you would use with a religion. Right? So if you went against the religious doctrines, you'd be called a heretic. But here, they were calling him a heretic for going against the materialist. And so they would fight over the nature of reality in the beginning, matter or mind. So in the beginning of the universe was mind, the base property, and matter kind of developed through that, or was matter the base property and mind develops? Okay. Over here, the young Earth and old Earth creation folks fight quite a bit over the uniformity of physics and over theology. So the theological claims about death and so on before the fall of man, or the uniformity of physics. You see up there that dividing line between physics and the age of the Earth and so on. The age of the Earth and the age of the universe really come down to a fight over physics. Did physics change in the past or not? Okay. And then this middle group fights over interventionism. So the intelligent design folks will say interventions were required because of these discontinuities we see in nature. And the theistic evolution folks will say, no, intervention was not required. God just shook the box just so, and that these are natural occurrences. So that might be like punctuated equilibrium, where you have sort of mutations building up but not really being expressed, and then all of a sudden rapidly, boom, all of these genes get expressed and you have a brand new creature. Okay. So those would be other theories other than this gradual mutation with change over time. And then lastly, down here, panpsychism and theistic evolution would fight over whether God's necessary or just mind in the matter. Okay. So this is a monster table that compares all these different worldviews, and you will certainly find some of your opinions on here, and maybe some things you didn't even think about, and that's great. So in terms of Christians, a lot of times they want to know, well, where's the dividing line for the Christian group? I've visited with people in all of these camps that I've colored yellow, and have seen that they have a strong adherence to the Bible and so on. These people in all of these yellow groups would say, yes, I'm a Christian. Okay, not that that's, again, the only religion we talked about in this course, but it is a dominant religion in this area, and so we want to talk about where's the dividing line if you were to divide lines, and dividing lines are not always great, but if you're in this group, you're going to say, no, the yellow is more close to our view. If you're in that group, say, no, the yellow is where my camp is. This is my attempt to be as objective as possible and say, I've seen people in all of these different views hold the Bible up and the tenets of the Christian faith, and that they would say, I believe those tenets. The only time, this is kind of a real light-colored yellow. There's some folks in the theistic evolution camp that would take issue with some of the traditional tenets of the Christian faith. So again, it might be a mixed bag there. The intelligent design, strictly, if you look at their literature, they don't make a claim as an organization. So even though there's probably dominated by Christians in that group, and a lot of Christians will use their literature to argue for their view, as an organization, they're not making claims on the Bible. They're not including the Bible in their arguments at all. So that's why I didn't color them yellow. It's not a thing to say that they're bad or anything like that. And I'm not saying anybody's bad on this table. I'm just saying when you're talking to somebody and they want to know, well, who are the Christians on this group, it's hard to figure out. But in general, you talk to that person and see how they value the Bible and how they adhere to the tenets of the Christian faith, and it's a good discussion to get into. Now, what's interesting is that very little changes over time. Okay, And remember, we looked at the Scopes trial, which happened 95 years ago. Okay? And people still love debates. So that back in the day, they pitted the atheist against the Christian, and even this debate happened just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, between Ken Ham and Bill Nye. You recognize Bill Nye, perhaps. And they had it at the Creation Museum. And so they were still pitting this atheist scientist against the Christian fundamentalist. And it got clicks. I mean, it got a lot of views and a lot of discussion. But what's interesting is the middle views that bridge the gaps. And this is a quote from Larson's book, written about the Scopes trial, and yet it's still true today. The popular press seemed intent on pitting the fundamentalists like Brian against the agnostics and materialists like Darrow. And both sides scorned the middle. And that's the thing that hasn't changed as well. People love a show. They love, let's get the two poles together to scream at each other. And that's what I can't stand about our news. You watch the news nowadays. Let's get the most absurd person on either end, bring them on so they can shout over each other. And nobody's really talking about reasonable solutions to anything and really seeking the truth. They're just trying to scream at each other. And I'm trying to present an idea that we don't need to do that. We can get into good conversations. And so the left and the right, again, Bill Nye and Ken Ham having this debate, it still gets clicks today. But the middle is scorned by either side. The strict materialists took Thomas Nagel to task. And he still agrees with them on 99% of everything. Okay? And the Ken Ham's camp will take Hugh Ross to task. And they agree on 99% of everything. And so the middle is scorned in all of this. But don't let that dissuade you. You look at this table and others like it, and you decide what you believe. And don't let the people on either end shouting for you to come to their side affect you. You look and do your own research, you get into good conversations, and you come up with your set, the things of life that you're convinced are true. Don't pick your views because they're popular. Pick them because you think they're true. But also be open to new ideas. There may be some things, some new data that you haven't come across. And that's the idea of being educated. It's being able to entertain an idea without accepting it first. You first have to entertain a new idea. And that's what an educated person is able to do, instead of just shutting off their ears. And let me tell you a little tale here. This is Ludwig Boltzmann, one of my heroes. He's a physicist. He's the one that started out describing the motions of gases and equilibrium. And he solved that problem by using discrete mathematics. Okay? And he took the velocities and he said, yeah, there's essentially an infinite number of velocities, but I'm going to put them in little bins. I'm going to make a table. I'm going to do this numerically. And so in order to do it numerically, he just decided that gases could only have particular velocities. And if they wanted to go from this speed to the next speed, they had to jump to a faster velocity, that it wasn't a smooth transition. And that was really the birth of quantum mechanics. His math that he used to solve that problem was then used to develop quantum mechanics. But what did his view say? His view said that there were gas particles, there were particulates that we now know we call atoms. He was an atomist. And the positivists were so against him that forced him into depression. And his battle with the positivists, the people that said, if you can't see the atoms, they don't exist. But yet his math worked with this idea of atoms. He believed that they were there because the math related to atoms worked. But they were saying, no, you can't postulate these things that you have no evidence. You can't see them, they don't exist. And it was enough of his depression for him to take his life on vacation with his family. Tragic end. So my point is, go lightly with each other. Get into conversations, but don't hound anybody. Ask those Columbo questions. What do you mean by that? And the most important, how did you come to that conclusion? No matter what your view is, you should be able to discuss it. When someone asks you that question, how did you come to that conclusion? Oh, you're a believer. Why? What makes you think there's a God? I'm not attacking. I want to get into that discussion with you. Oh, you're a non-believer. What about that are you convinced about? Why do you think there's no organizing principle in this universe? And what do you do with the discontinuities we see in nature? These are good questions that lead to conversation. And being open in the conversation could prevent things like this, where you hound somebody and essentially mentally push them over the edge. And so this is not just a great place to end our course, or in this part of the course, but it's an important discussion, because on Wednesday, kind of conflicts with this class. The doors open at 1:30. I'd like everybody to go to this and be thinking about the conversations that we've had in class. And that personal connection you have with somebody may be the thing that saves their life. You get into a good conversation with someone and you don't know how much steam that allows them to blow off, and just to share what they truly believe with somebody can have a huge impact. And so we're going to go to this. I mean, if you have a conflict, it's not like I'm going to take off points, but I would like for everybody, instead of Wednesday, instead of coming here, we'll go over there. So be here tomorrow, but not on Wednesday. Okay. On Wednesday, go to the LSC, and we'll not meet here. Like I said, the doors open at 1:30, so you can get there early and sit up front. But be thinking about the conversations that you will have when you're listening to this person give his story. Kevin Hines attempted to take his own life by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, and now he shares his story of hope and survival. And so it's a suicide prevention and suicide awareness program, and I think it's an interesting place to end up. It was sort of coincidental that this happened, but again, Boltzmann is a cautionary tale. His math led him to believe these things that he didn't have physical evidence of. But yet he ended up being right. But even if he was wrong, he shouldn't have been hounded over it. Okay. And so that's a good place to end. We'll do our writing assignment this week on that table about maybe some questions you have about particular rows, and then maybe a reflection on if it applied at all, and if so, how, to the talk on Wednesday. Okay, and so that'll be our last writing assignment, our last time together, and I've really enjoyed it. So hopefully you have too.